This is 19:30 GMT on Wednesday, the 29th of July 2020. This is a seminar edition of the KhoodeelaarTV channel, and we start with a display of this particular interview with a Nigerian origin person who is a sports person, now rugby player in the UK. His name is Maro Itoje, that is the pronunciation. Talks about race, politics, and how Saracens get over the salary cap scandal. Now, the reason I'm holding this is in the context of the end hunger at root theme of these seminars. And end hunger at root encompasses and includes the resources that are available in the person, in the place, in the country, in the region, in the origin. And this is opposite the hundreds of dead bodies that have been displayed earlier in the week or in the last few days in one of the British newspapers. Dead bodies of so-called migrants dying while crossing the sea into Europe or into the UK. And these are the dead bodies that have been displayed as part of the scare and the alarm that the agenda setters and couriers of the propaganda want to create in the minds of the people who are intending to migrate to the UK or to other Western European countries. So this is the contrast. The contrast is that hunger, famine, starvation can be avoided on a large scale in a massive way and prevent. One of the benefits of that would be to prevent the need, stop the need for people from Africa and Asia to want to migrate anywhere out of their own countries. Most of the societies from which these people have to leave and are leaving and have been leaving are afflicted by lack of democracy, lack of values for access to basic remedies in conflict resolution, in settling disputes in the country without risking lives or livelihoods or the savings. So, what I'm saying here is that it is not just a simple migration that all these people want to come into line and form the line in the queue and want to cross the sea, no matter whether that crossing entails their risking their life. It is complicated, and the complication has to be addressed, realized, faced up to, and dealt with every single day, every single hour. Hundreds of millions of people in Africa and Asia are afflicted by lack of democracy in their own home countries. No matter which country it is, most of Asia, most of Africa is actually a territory for each of the individual concerned that has no hope for this individual if they stayed there in terms of economic sustainability or economic benefit or even having a proper meal the next day, next meal. So this desperate situation pervades right across the subcontinent of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and the continent of Asia, most of it, and the continent of Africa, most of it. So we have to address the poverty, hunger, and famine in the context of the poverty of democracy, poverty of just society, poverty of institutions that are manned and womaned by people who are fair-minded, who are generous, who are kind and compassionate to their fellow human beings, seeking the services of the agencies of the state or the government. So this is a complicated agenda, complex agenda, but it is the only agenda that can solve the problem of hundreds of millions of people exposed to hunger and famine forever, and the West playing pet platitudes and actually failing to address this or refusing to address this. And as I said in my broadcast at the end of the Channel 4 news, the slot, which I wrote and presented in January 1992, I said to John Major, who was the Prime Minister of the UK at the time and who was about to go to the United Nations in New York and address the United Nations General Assembly in that capacity, at that time, the UK's capacity, the round of the President of the General Assembly. And before that, Major was surrounding himself by propaganda that his country or his government or his regime and his allies, like the United States, were concerned about the nuclear proliferation or nuclear power acquisition by certain countries in the so-called third world. And I was saying that that was probably the case, but that was not the priority, because the priority was the West was threatened by its own insecurity, its own intolerance, its own racism, and its own fear of the poor coming from Asia and Africa and taking over the West. That was the paraphrase. I didn't actually say the actual words that I had written and broadcast. That can be found in the archives, but the essential message is the same, that the only way to stop the Western ordinary indigenous native people fearing that their countries or their societies would be overtaken by migrants, hordes of migrants, thousands of migrants, hundreds of thousands of migrants queuing up from all the way from the end of Asia to the end of Africa and wanting to come over to the British Isles or to other similar Western countries. The only way to prevent that, the only way to avoid that, the only way to solve that problem, the problem of these people fearing that they're being overtaken by Africans and Asians, is to address the poverty, the hunger and famine in those countries. And the so-called aid budget that the British regimes have successfully, or successive regimes in Britain have maintained as propaganda, this aid budget is nowhere near matching the needs for money and resources that are actually present in those countries in Africa and Asia. So the budget has to be increased, the budget has to be directed, focused on addressing the causes of poverty, hunger, and famine, and lack of equality, lack of basic universal human rights in Asia and Africa. And that is the long term, but that is the term that has to be started now. I said that 28 years ago in January 1992. 28 years they have not done what I said. Not only have they not done what I said, they have done the opposite. They have created wars and they have created massacres and they have expedited, exacerbated the desperate rush of more millions of people from Africa and Asia who are affected Asian African countries and regions to want to leave their countries and regions and seek safety and economic security in the West. How stupid could all these governments and regimes be? And the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, who has been appearing in the social media almost on a daily basis, preaching after the event, for example. He preaches under the banner of Nelson Mandela. Now, he actually never has acknowledged the distortion of Mandela's message when it mattered, and the post facto, that is after the event, celebration of Mandela's message when it really has been outdated and made obsolete by other events. So the United Nations Secretary General, although he is not physically Superman or super person, he has the token symbolic position of the Secretary General, and he has to get his homework done, and he has to face up to the reality of campaigners like myself, advocates like myself, against world hunger, poverty, and famine, and against the mass migration of westbound people from Africa and Asia. And I said that this applies to Philip Alston, who is a professor of law at the New York University, and who was for the last few years who was the United Nations envoy or special rapporteur on extreme poverty and human rights. And in that capacity, Philip Alston has visited various countries, including the UK, in October 2018. And I have written to him, and he has not directly answered my critique of him, but I have written to him and I have sent him extensive, empirically collected, exclusive evidence from the ground in East London about how poverty is created by local democratic elected councils, and how the central government regime, whatever color, political color it is, colludes and collaborates and is complicit in the creation, in the perpetuation, in the maintenance of that reign of poverty across the country in Britain. And I very extensively criticize Philip Alston's ignorance, because as a professor of law, Alston is expected under universal assumptions to know that institutions of the state, including the ordinary courts of law, the county courts in the case of England, these are manned and womaned, peopled and staffed by personnel who have no conception, let alone any care about poverty, implications, and impact of their decisions and the behavior. So therefore, when the overrated, over-celebrated columnist, socially conscious columnist of the Guardian, Polly Toynbee, visited the Shoreditch and Clerkenwell County Court, or Clerkenwell and Shoreditch County Court, as it has been renamed after Shoreditch was abolished and it was merged with Clerkenwell County Court. When she visited that court, she said in a later column she published on The Guardian that she was there to witness how so many endless numbers of possessions or evictions applications were being given the go-ahead, and how evictions were being carried out. In the actual article that Polly Toynbee wrote after that visit, she exposed herself as being seriously ignorant about what actually goes on in the county court, or what actually took place on that day in the county court, in Clerkenwell County Court, which effectively is the lead part of the name, Clerkenwell and Shoreditch County Court. Now, I have had my organization, campaigning organizations, write to Polly Toynbee several times about that piece that she wrote, and raise issues with her about her ignorance, her lack of information and knowledge about what goes on in the county courts, and the role of the county courts in creating homelessness. Polly Toynbee's final answer was that she didn't have the resources to deal with all those things. Can you imagine? So I'm saying this on the record, exclusive, world exclusive analysis and report on the poverty of thought and poverty of care, the poverty of understanding, poverty of knowledge on the part of the most celebrated so-called left of center social commentator in Britain of the last two decades or so, Polly Toynbee. And she has written so many books about social inequality, injustice, and all the rest of it. I shall be covering in future editions of the seminar her inadequacy and lack of engagement with the evidence, and shall be extrapolating that across the rest of the opinion forming platforms where the poverty in Britain, the hunger and famine in Britain are created by the so-called institutions and agencies that are supposed to be in highly adequately funded place to stop poverty, hunger, and famine and inequality. And so therefore, I go back to Nigeria, and this person who says that if you want to scare a Nigerian parent, tell them you're going to do music. Now, that is obviously not the stereotype image or stereotypical image of the Nigerian parent or the African parent, but this is a rare one expressed by this rugby player, and it says in this profile written by David Walsh in the Sunday Times of the 26th of July 2020, page 14 and page 15. There are two pages, mostly two pages, and that is dedicated to this interview with Maro Itoje. Now, what that actually says is that there is higher level of morality and ethics and awareness in Africa and Asia than it is given credit for ever. And this aversion to music is not literally an aversion to music by the Nigerian parent, but it is illustrating the fact that the real rigorous discipline of learning and knowledge and education is what the average or the concerned parents are concerned about. And that can apply to African parents as well as Asian parents of all backgrounds. And so therefore, this is not accepted. When the British media or the Western media parade dead bodies of migrants who died trying to cross the ocean, trying to reach the West, they never give the impression that they come from families, people, loved ones who are as real people, as concerned, caring, intelligent, thoughtful, thinking people as anybody that can be found in the destination countries of the desperate kind of journeys in the West. So we have to use the image that there are as real people, as thinking people, as concerned people, as caring people all over Asia and Africa. And that is the first resource. The first resource is the confidence of the identity and the awareness on the part of the people. That is the resource which begins to address the lack of food and lack of other means. And that is where we have to begin. So we shall be developing in the course of time that theme, and we shall be updating with evidence and illustrations and examples. And we shall show that the media in this country, in the West, in Britain, in France, in Germany, the media has been run by the agenda or under the theme of white Western societies have the answers and have the resources and have the morality and the humanity and the compassion and all the rest of it to solve the problem of the world. That is not the case. That cannot be the case, and that should not be allowed to stay as the idea of the case of the world, because the human being has to occupy the planet equally and especially occupy and live in the place where they have their homes, their natural homes, their original homes. No country on the planet has the space to accommodate even a part of another normal-sized Asian or African country. Why should they? These people belong in their own countries, as everyone belongs in their own countries, and they should be able to pursue their natural resources that exist in abundance but have not been allowed to be explored and promoted and fertilized in terms of, not fertilized in the sense of the chemical fertilization, but fertilized in the sense of being nurtured and cared and promoted and protected and shielded and continued in the natural environment. With respect to the ecology has to be respected, and the animals have to be respected, and all the cruelty and everything that so dominates the ordinary life in so many parts of the world, in Asia and Africa, where cruelty to animals is taken as a granted, given as a, treated as being a thing that should be allowed. And there is no awareness, there is no discussion, there is no action against the cruelty that is perpetrated daily against the animals across Asia and across Africa. And I come back to the same lack of care that exists in areas like Tower Hamlets, where I have seen, when I have been campaigning, collecting signatures and explaining to people a particular campaigning issue at the given time, I have noticed, because I've had to go into the front room or into the flat and had to kind of see so many fishes, big fishes, being kept in containers containing not even the size of the water that is the size of the fish. And I'm saying that is brutality, that is cruelty beyond description and condemnation. And these people must let the fish go, and the local council must take action, and it must send inspectors uh, around to visit all the homes in Tower Hamlets, in Newham and others, where there are animals being kept in captivity, like fish and other animals that are not being properly looked after. And care for the animals is an issue that I shall be discussing in a later edition of the seminars, and the updates will be based on what happens in Tower Hamlets. I'll give examples and actual date and chapter and verse, and I shall show how Tower Hamlets Council has been employing persons who are cruel to animals themselves. And so this is the same thing in Tower Hamlets as in Newham, as in Hackney and other boroughs. So I go back to the worldwide theme that cruelty to the culture of the animals, or the culture of the rights of the animal, culture based on the rights and needs of the animals, is prevalent and dominant across Asia, and it is found in Western countries where they're supposed to be animal lovers. And as a regular contributor to a number of online platforms where there are pictures and regular information about activities of people who keep cats, I have to say that those are the minority. The overwhelming majority of cats and dogs and foxes and squirrels and bunnies in the West are neglected. And this is not something that can be reported adequately in a short program, but that is the point I'm making. And that is the part of the seminar, which is to respect the ecology, respect the environment, and respect the beings on it. And the threat that the planet faces from global warming and other things are absolutely directly related to empire, imperialism, and the grotesque exploitation of resources in the colonized countries and dominions and regions, as well as they are in the so-called homes of liberty and freedom. What Donald Trump has been doing to liberty and freedom in America does not need to be reiterated here. It is so absolutely unbelievably happening round the clock that there is no need for me to give a commentary on that except to mention it. So therefore, he's destroying lives, and he's destroying the principles, the values that people gave their lives to establish. And there is America that is being kind of taken back to the darkness. It has never been out of the darkness, but it is taken back to deeper darkness than it has been for the decades, despite the fact that there have been violations throughout those decades of human rights. So the question of human rights, liberty, democracy, accountability in the West is very much linked with the question of hunger, famine, and desperation and massacre and genocide that have been taking place across the Asian continent, in African continent, and those violations and denials have not been getting the appropriate mention, let alone the urgent, serious attention, let alone the urgent, serious action by the Western regimes. And so, therefore, we have to continue raising the issues, mentioning the facts, and emphasizing the absence of importance given to those by the United Nations and its agencies. And we shall be coming back to this theme with updated comments and evidence and news and views and opinions and empirical updates wherever we can find them. And the theme is to end hunger at root. That is to say, that use the resources, human resources, the natural resources, the environmental resources in each of the countries affected by poverty and hunger and famine to create a livable environment, sustainable environment for people and creatures, so that the people don't have to do the most damaging self harm, which is to leave their countries and go in search of migration destinations that are never the solutions, not for the absolute majority. And for others, it is the route to death. And those are the things that I have been concerned about for decades. And as highlighted in my broadcast that I wrote and presented on Channel 4 News program called Slot News, that slot was followed by the slot followed the broadcast of the 7 p.m. news at that time. Now, Channel 4 television, as I said, I am one of the campaigning founders of Channel 4 television. But that is another issue that I shall be updating on in due course. And the problem with the lockdown and the absence of the so-called terrestrial television channels and the alteration in the schedules and the access to the output of satellite television means that we have produced, or we have made a beginning of producing this program, which is, in terms of technology, a relatively new avenue and mode. And we're currently testing the technology, and we are not decorating our backgrounds with too many colors and too many words. We are testing the actual content broadcast. And these contents are as relevant as if they were broadcast without the tag testing. So the intellectual property rights and the authoring rights and other exclusive rights to the contents belong with the writer, the author, which so far is myself, Muhammad Haque, and anyone who wants to cite, refer to, use, circulate any content or any part of it must expressly acknowledge these rights. And they should do that without having to be reminded of those rights. Breaching the rights comes with breaches of the rights come with penalties that are still available. So we don't want to enforce or apply for penalties for users or abusers of our content. We want the contents to be shared across the world, and currently we have limited followers on intentional in a purpose. We do not want any number of big numbers of followers. That's not the point. The point is to publish what we are saying, what we have to say, what the evidence is, and the published item can be accessed later. And the comparison that I have made between the millions of readers of the Sun newspaper and the less than millions of readers of other titles in Fleet Street, for example, in this context, in Britain, is the content, the quality. And that is where we are broadcasting this content, putting it on the record. And it doesn't matter whether one person views it or 100,000 people view it, depends on how much of that theme, the narrative, the advocacy, the evidence will be followed by action, positive action to redress poverty at all levels, democracy deficit, economic deficit, and all the rest of it. So, with those words, I am finishing this at 20 hours GMT, which is 21 hours GMT on Wednesday, the 29th of July 2020. Khuda Hafiz, goodbye. And the footnote is that our regular scheduled bulletins will include bulletins which will contain content in Siloti, in Bangladeshi, and in other languages from Asia and Africa where appropriate. And we shall be talking about issues to do with the local community, local communities, and democracy deficits. And also, we shall relate to other issues that actually affect and have implications on the theme that we are in existence and we are in process of advocating and promoting and upholding. Khuda Hafiz, goodbye.